Hello and welcome to Slow Sleep Stories. Thanks. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Where are you listening from tonight? Let me know your location and your local time in the comments. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's start this journey together tonight. Take a moment to notice where your body is supported. Maybe it's your shoulders, or the way your legs are resting, or the quiet, reliable feel of your back against the surface beneath you. You don't need to adjust anything just yet, just notice. Now, take a slow breath in through your nose and let it fall out gently through your mouth. There's nothing sharp in this breath, no urgency, no pressure. It's a sleepy breath, one you don't even have to think much about. Let your jaw soften. Let your eyebrows relax. Good. Now, slowly let the weight in your limbs begin to feel heavier, not unpleasant, but like melting into a warm, familiar bed after a long walk. There's nothing to hold on to. Your fingers can be lazy. Your feet can be forgotten. You are safe. You are still. You are here. Let your thoughts come and go if they like. Like the soft flapping of wings in the background, let them drift. And now, a story is coming. It's a gentle one, not very important. Might make you smile as you fall asleep. In the spring of 1842, the Belgian sky was a thick watercolor wash of soft gray and distant blue. A breeze wandered through the narrow streets of a town called Fleuret-Servant, where the people were sensible. The coffee was served lukewarm, and absolutely nothing exciting ever happened. That isn't till the job posting appeared. It wasn't posted in a normal way. No clerk came to nail it to a tree or set it on a shop window. One morning, just as the bakery was pulling its first loaves from the oven, a scroll drifted gently from the sky, tied with a bit of twine and stamped with a wax seal. It landed neatly on the mayor's stoop, precisely at the same time his cat was yawning. The scroll read, "Wanted couriers of the sky must have wings, reliable instincts, and the ability to read a map upside down. Pigeons preferred. Compensation includes weekly breadcrumbs, housing in lofts, and occasional compliments. Apply in person if you can fly." Madame Dupont, the mayor's wife, read it twice over her cup of thin tea. Then she blinked. "It says pigeons," she murmured. "They want to hire pigeons?" The mayor, who hadn't yet located his slippers, just grunted. But the pigeons heard. Word flew fast among the rooftops and chimneys of Fleuret-Servant. By noon, at least a dozen pigeons were cooing under the town's ancient bell tower, trying to make sense of the opportunity. Some thought it was a joke, perhaps written by those mischievous sparrows. Others, like a young pigeon named Olivier, fluffed their feathers with purpose. "There's honor in post," he said to no one in particular. "Even if we've only got beaks." Across the countryside, similar conversations bloomed. In the lavender fields near Ghent, an elderly pigeon named Madame Plumette, who wore tiny wire spectacles on her beak and had once delivered letters during the Napoleonic days, perked up when she heard she had long since retired, living in an ivy-covered dovecote behind a monastery, reading rain patterns and occasionally giving romantic advice to young starlings. But something about the job stirred her. Perhaps it was the phrase, occasional compliments. She missed those. Meanwhile, humans all over the region debated whether the scroll was an elaborate prank. A few scholars speculated it was an avant art project. One farmer claimed it was written by the ghost of Da Vinci. But while people argued, the pigeons got moving. By the end of the week, flocks were en route, not just from Belgium, but from neighboring parts of France, the Netherlands, and even one particularly dramatic pigeon from Italy who wore a cape. They weren't ordinary birds. These were highly skilled sky travelers. Some had flown through wars. Some had carried poems in storms. One had once delivered a croissant from Paris to Lionel, though, to be fair, he had nibbled the corner. The gathering was set for the following Tuesday, at sunrise atop the Grand Palais Dome in Brussels. As dawn rolled in, the sky turned milky gold. There they perched, hundreds of birds, cooing, adjusting monocles, preening, and whispering last-minute motivational mantras like steady wing, clear sky, or you're just a feathered envelope. A stout pigeon with ink-stained claws waddled forward and unrolled the second scroll. "Welcome," he said, clearing his throat with a dignified croak. "This will be Europe's first official avian mail route. You will be judged on your flying grace, your navigational intuition, and your ability to resist pecking breadcrumbs mid-delivery." There were a few nervous chuckles. One young bird swallowed a blueberry whole out of stress, and, he added, "You must, at all costs, not deliver the wrong letter to the wrong nest. We had an incident last year involving a breakup note and a turkey. We shan't discuss it." And so the pigeons took to the sky, eager to prove themselves. They flew loops and figure eights. They performed short-distance sprints with scrolls strapped to their legs. One bird attempted a dramatic dive, then got distracted by a shiny spoon, and collided softly with a chimney. He was applauded for effort. Madame Plumette arrived fashionably late, descending in slow, elegant spirals. Her wings didn't beat, they glided. She wore her spectacles like a queen wore her crown, and when she landed, the other birds instinctively made space. She didn't speak at first. She simply opened her left wing, pulled out a folded, weathered letter from a secret pocket, and placed it on the dome. "To the skies," she said gently, her voice like soft parchment. The pigeons were silent. That's how they knew she'd be chosen. The next morning, Brussels was awash in an early golden hue, the rooftops yawning beneath a lazy mist, and all across the city, tiny bird-sized satchels were being prepared. Madame Plumette had officially accepted the role of chief postmistress of the newly formed Avian Postal Confederation, or the Feather and Scroll Society, as she preferred to call it, because it sounded less like paperwork and more like possibility. Under her wing, literally, she carried a tiny leather notebook where she scribbled assignments, observations, and occasionally poetry. She had elegant penmanship for a pigeon. Spectacles perched halfway down her beak gave her the permanent appearance of mild disapproval, though those who knew her best swore she smiled with her feathers. Her first task was sorting. Now, in human mailrooms, sorting is done with bins and labels and color-coded boxes. But in the pigeon version, it involved lots of gentle cooing, feather ruffling, and a long rope strung across two rooftops where scrolls were clipped by tiny clothespins and pecked into place. Her second task was staff selection. The candidates were how to put it. There was Jacques, a large pigeon with chest plumage so puffed he couldn't quite see where he was flying. He had charm, though, and once delivered a fish to the wrong address and still got tipped. Then there was Lisette, Pigeon from Marseille, who insisted on pre-flight stretches and often muttered to herself in 3 dialects. She had a wingspan that made even the doves jealous. And of course, young Olivier, who idolized Plumet and tried to mimic her flying style, though he often got distracted midair and once flew directly into a basket of apples. Recon work. He called it gathering fruit data. Training began immediately. Madame Plumet was firm but fair. She taught wind reading in the mornings and scroll nodding in the afternoons. If a pigeon failed to memorize a delivery route, they were assigned worm cleaning duty, a surprisingly organized process involving tweezers and dramatic sighs. By the end of the week, 6 pigeons had dropped out, one because he developed a mysterious allergy to parchment, another because he insisted he was actually a goose in disguise and didn't belong here. Still, the core team held strong. Soon, the skies of Belgium fluttered with bird messengers in perfect formation. Every day at 10:02 a.m., the pigeons lined up along the Grand Palais Dome, scrolls tied with ribbon dangling from their legs, waiting for Madame Plumet's subtle nod. At precisely 10:03, she raised her left wing. "Fly," she said softly, and they did. Letters zipped across rooftops and canals. A bakery's order invoice was delivered in under 4 minutes record time. A love poem riddled with grammatical errors arrived safely in a flower pot beside a window where a young girl in curlers sighed dramatically. "It's from Claude," she whispered, "the boy who smells like roasted hazelnuts." Once, during a sudden downpour, Lisette lost control of her scroll mid-flight. It landed neatly inside a nun's umbrella, who paused, read the address, and personally walked it to its destination, remarking, "Well, at least the pigeons tried." The humans began to notice. At first, they were skeptical, but when bills began arriving early and apologies on parchment came wrapped in feathers, people warmed to the idea. The local newspaper ran the headline, "Postal Pigeons, Plucky and Punctual." A painter named Emile wrote a letter just to say thank you and tucked a sunflower seed in the ribbon. Jacques delivered it and sobbed for 17 minutes. "Someone noticed my flying arc," he said. Of course, there were a few hiccups. One pigeon flew backward for an entire week before anyone realized he was dyslexic. He was reassigned to storage logistics and thrived. Another thought, each scroll was a snack and had to be gently reminded, repeatedly, no, letters are not delicious. Still, the operation ran smoothly. Madame Plumet's tiny notebook grew thick with roots and stories. Each evening, she sat on the copper weather vane overlooking the dome, watching her team flutter home, scrolls empty, wings tired, beaks dusted with crumbs from grateful recipients. She once noted, "The world does not stop for birds, but birds, if given purpose, may teach the world to pause." Then she sneezed. Feather allergies, occupational hazard. Back at the roost, Olivier approached her with a concern. "Madame," he said, trying to sound older than his 3 seasons, "do we ever deliver secrets?" Plumet blinked. "We deliver whatever is tied to the leg, mon petit, but secrets often fly heavier than we expect." He nodded thoughtfully. "One of my scrolls smelled like rose water and tears. Love letter," she said. "Handle with extra care, and maybe avoid onions that day." Olivier beamed. The days grew longer, the pigeons grew braver, and Plumet, though she rarely said it aloud, felt something stir beneath her feathers that hadn't fluttered in years, a sense of belonging. And though no one declared it officially, the Belgian sky became, for a time, a little more organized and far more poetic. Spring edged into summer with a lazy kind of certainty. The rooftops of Brussels shimmered beneath a warm haze, and the pigeons, those fluttering feathered postfolk, grew into their roles like teacups fit to saucers. Madame Plumette, ever precise, had introduced a new weekly event called the Scroll Shuffle, where delivery birds traded routes at random to test their memory, patience, and resistance to visiting bakeries out of habit. Jacques always hoped to land the route near the cheese shop. Lisette preferred the one with the open courtyards for wing stretches. Olivier, predictably, liked whichever route allowed him to fly past the park fountain where a statue of a bronze boy always seemed to smirk just for him. One Wednesday, just after sunrise, a scroll arrived that was different. It was sealed with 3 wax stamps and bore no address, just a single word: urgent. Plumette raised an eyebrow, adjusted her spectacles, and tapped the scroll gently with her beak. Odd, she muttered. No feathers on it, no breadcrumbs. Suspiciously formal. She unfurled it slowly. The note inside read, "Your presence is requested in Ghent. A matter of great importance regarding the future of Avian Post Midnight, South Bell Tower. Come alone." She reread it twice, then tucked it under her wing. Time to stretch these old flight feathers. That evening, under the silvery watch of a half-moon, Plumette flew in wide arcs toward Ghent. Her flight was steady, her silhouette gliding over the sleeping fields like an embroidered stitch on a quilt dot. She arrived at the South Bell Tower, its bricks warm from the day's heat. A low hoot greeted her. "About time," said a voice from the shadows. Out stepped a sleek barn owl with dappled feathers and an expression that implied he knew all your secrets and still approved of you anyway. "Name's Hugo," he said. "Security Wing, Northern Coalition." Plumette frowned. "Security Wing? We barely have a filing system." Hugo grinned. "That's why I'm here." Inside the bell tower, a curious scene awaited. Several birds of varying sizes and species were gathered around a makeshift map table drawn on old parchment. There were seagulls, crows, starlings, and a particularly sleepy pelican who may have just wandered in looking for snacks. "We've intercepted suspicious scrolls," said Hugo. "Bogus messages, forgeries, some sent with counterfeit wax seals. The integrity of the Avian Post is under threat." Plumette nodded slowly. "Someone's trying to confuse the network." "Exactly," said a crow, with one feather perpetually out of place. "There's a rat involved, literally a rat named Albert." A few birds gasped. The pelican Albert, as it turned out, was once a mailroom janitor at a train station who had taught himself to mimic wax seals using mashed berries and candle wax. He'd been forging messages, misleading pigeon deliveries, and rerouting letters for unknown reasons. "Disgraceful," muttered Lisette back in Brussels, when she heard, "probably drinks soup with a fork." Back in the tower, Plumette paced. "We'll need tighter protocols," she said. "Recognition codes, secret symbols in the folds, maybe. Sunflower seed authentication." The room buzzed with agreement. "I'll need my team," she added. "No bird flies alone when the sky is cloudy." Hugo tilted his head, impressed. "You run a tight coop." Over the next week, Plumette and her squad set up a clever system. Messages would now carry invisible twine threads, plucked only from the tail feathers of a trusted dove named Margot. These threads were nearly impossible to fake and faintly smelled, like lavender and smugness. Olivier was assigned lookout duty atop the Musée des Instruments de Musique. With his tiny spyglass fashioned from a cracked monocle, he kept watch for unauthorized messengers or rats in trench coats. Jacques, despite his poor sense of direction, was surprisingly adept at sniffing out false wax. His sense of smell had developed remarkably ever since the cheese incident. He claimed it was a gift from the Brie gods. Meanwhile, Lisette coordinated a flight grid with efficiency that would terrify even the strictest military planner. Birds flew in pairs, messages double-checked at checkpoints, and if any scroll arrived with raspberry-scented wax, it was immediately pecked into confetti. Word spread fast in the skies. "Don't mess with the feather and scroll," murmured the gulls near the docks. "Not unless you want your breadcrumbs revoked," added a starling ominously. Eventually, Albert the rat was spotted trying to impersonate a sparrow by wearing paper wings and squeaking in soprano. He was apprehended, mildly pecked, and politely escorted to the Garden of Exile, which was really just a compost bin behind a monastery. Peace was restored. The pigeons resumed their duties with renewed dignity. One human wrote an anonymous letter of admiration to the elegant sky messengers and tied it with a bow. Jacques cried again. Plumette, ever composed, noted the week's events in her notebook under the heading Security and superlated Drama. Then she took a deep breath, fluffed her feathers, and looked at the horizon. The sky was still full of scrolls, but now also trust. The next season drifted in gently, like a letter arriving with no urgency. Autumn curled through the air, softening the edges of the sky. The pigeons of Brussels adjusted their roots slightly to accommodate the cooler winds. Their feathers fluffed ever so slightly more, and their landings took on the extra wobble of birds trying not to slip on wet rooftop tiles. The avian post was thriving. Scrolls fluttered in and out of baskets. Humans began sending longer letters just to see what words looked like on old paper. Some included drawings. One child, somewhere in the quiet hills beyond Antwerp, had tied a piece of chocolate to his letter for the pigeon who delivered it. The note read, "You work hard. Please enjoy this tiny snack." Lisette wept over that one. Despite all the progress, there remained one problem. No one had ever properly explained how this whole bird post thing had started. The humans believed it was their idea. The pigeons assumed it was divine intervention, but Plumette remembered vaguely a different truth, one buried in feathers and time. It began with a mystery scroll found under the floorboards of the oldest dovecote in Bruges. Jacques had discovered it while trying to retrieve a walnut he'd hidden for dramatic effect the month before. The scroll was bound in blue twine and smelled faintly of rosemary and library dust. It read, "To the birds who come after, if you found this, you are part of the agreement." The first message was delivered not by accident, but by trust, hunger, and a remarkably intelligent goose. Plumette reread it 12 times. "A goose," she blinked. Lisette, reading over her shoulder, muttered, "Typical. They always leave out the dramatic goose origin stories." They decided to investigate. The clues led them to a lakeside village called Zilvermere, known mostly for its marsh frogs and a statue of a goose wearing spectacles. The inscription simply read, Eugene, after some poking around with a swan who insisted on being paid in compliments, they learned the story. Eugene had been a curious goose in the early 1800s, living on the edge of the human village and growing obsessed with folded paper. He would watch school children write notes, then sneak in to steal their paper hats and messages. He eventually began delivering lost letters to their rightful owners, not for food, but for the applause. He adored applause. One day, during a flood that stranded the village, Eugene had flown across an entire valley to deliver a call for help. The town was saved. From then on, birds were trusted as messengers. He started it all, said a wise old heron in the village, nibbling a biscuit. That goose. He wasn't just clever, he was stylish, had a feather scarf. Back in Brussels, Plumette, she recounted the tale with reverence. We owe our wingspan of duty to a goose with a flair for drama, she concluded. Olivier sighed. I once tried a feather scarf, got laughed off the cathedral steps. Jacques nodded, still. Kind of heroic, Lisette added. We should honor him, add his name to the official scroll registry. So they did. From that day forward, every newly trained pigeon was given a scroll bearing a quote from Eugene Fly, not for the crumbs, but for the cause. Plumette, while officially too senior for sentiment, kept a tiny drawing of Eugene tucked in her satchel. It showed the goose in mid-flight, a scroll in his beak, and a trail of applause below him. But soon, something else arrived, a request. This one was different. It wasn't sealed in wax or scented like almonds. It came from a child in the Swiss Alps who had tied her message to the leg of a mountain chough, hoping it would get somewhere magical. The note read, Dear whoever gets this, do you ever get tired of flying? Do you dream about something else? I hope you have fun doing your job. From Nina. Plumette didn't laugh. She sat on her perch for a long time, holding the note in her claws, looking out across the rooftops. Later that evening, she called a quiet meeting of her inner circle, just the usuals, Jacques, Lisette, Olivier, and Margot, the dove, who always arrived 5 minutes early and brought crumbs. We've worked hard, Plumette said softly, but maybe it's time to think beyond Brussels. Olivier blinked. You mean expand? Jacques gasped. Like a mobile scroll unit, airmail outpost. Lisette narrowed her eyes. Or retirement. They all went quiet. No, said Plumette gently. Not retirement, evolution. She placed Nina's note in the center of the circle. There are more children, more messages, more skies. They sat with that thought, letting it settle like dust on sunbeams. And so the plan was born. Operation Far-Feather. They would train new birds, set up scroll stops in other cities, Florence, Edinburgh, Marrakesh, even Oslo, if they could brave the cold. Each pigeon would carry not only messages, but stories of Eugene, of scrolls dodging soup spills, of wax imposters and cheese-related espionage, and always, always, a bit of lavender thread. The sky, after all, was big enough for everyone. The following spring, the birds of Brussels began their quiet migration, not to escape the cold, but to spread the dream. They flew with purpose, wearing little sashes of dyed twine, their satchels snug beneath their wings. Operation Farfeather was in motion. Plumette remained at the helm, orchestrating from the rooftops like a feathered conductor. She'd fashioned a command center out of an old clock tower, complete with maps, message tubes, and a teacup labeled inspiration that always held a single biscuit. Her most trusted team flew out in different directions. Lisette took the southern route, heading for the Mediterranean with a fondness for sun-warmed rooftops and olive trees. Jacques went north, bundled in a hand-knitted pigeon muffler made by a well-meaning grandmother in Bruges. Olivier headed west, in pursuit of tales from windswept cliffs and laughing farmers who still wrote love notes in pencil. Even Margot the dove, who once insisted she would never, under any circumstances, cross open water, made it as far as the coast. She later sent a scroll back that read, "Made it to Calais, fell in love with a puffin, may not return." Plumette smiled when she read it. Margot had always had a soft spot for birds who wore tuxedos. As their roots expanded, so did their influence. Small towns in France began setting up tiny scrawl baskets on their windowsills, lined with soft cloth. Children were taught the scrawl fold in school. Old men at bakeries began slipping poems to their wives via Pigeon. But not everything was easy in Vienna. One group of pigeons got tangled up in a string quartet's outdoor rehearsal. The lead violinist accused them of sabotage. In Prague, a curious owl tried to join the service, but kept delivering the messages upside down. And in a village outside Geneva, someone kept using the scroll service to order sandwiches, specifically to ham, no mustard, or you'll hear from my goose. That part may have actually involved Eugene's descendants. Still, for every mishap, there were a dozen small wonders. A girl in Seville received a birthday message from her grandmother in Brussels, written on rose-scented paper and delivered by a white dove named Pipo. A young boy in Krakow learned to tie a scroll using only one hand, and in a small German village, an entire wedding was conducted by messages flown between two hilltops because the families refused to meet in person. The birds wore flower garlands. Through it all, Plumette remained grounded literally and figuratively. She chose not to fly anymore. A general must know where the floorboards creak, she said. Her new role involved consulting, map drawing, biscuit eating, and composing the official scroll newsletter, Wingtips and Whimsy. The newsletter's first headline, "Eugene would be proud." Each week, she featured pigeon profiles, snack reviews, sunflower seed scones were trending, and humorous delivery fails, like Jacques accidentally landing on a choir mid-hymn. Eventually, the scroll system grew too large to manage without help from humans. So, Plumette did the unthinkable. She sent a scroll to the mayor of Brussels. It was written on golden parchment, tied in purple string, and included a tiny chocolate coin. The note read, "Dear human in charge, let's talk partnerships. Love, Plumette. P.S. Your windows need cleaning." 3 days later, she was invited to City Hall, where she dramatically landed on a velvet cushion and refused to speak until she was offered a cracker. Negotiations went smoothly. Soon, an official bureau of feathered communications was formed, co-directed by pigeons and humans alike. Bird-friendly rooftops were mandated across the city, and special perches were installed at libraries, post offices, and cafes. The motto, "Write it, fold it, fly it." As for Plumette, she finally penned her memoir, Wings of Change, which began with the words, "I was never meant to lead. I just wanted to stop, landing in soup. On the 5th anniversary of the scroll service, a statue of Eugene the Goose was unveiled in the heart of Brussels. He stood tall, wearing his signature spectacles, a scroll clutched proudly in his beak. That night, Plumet stood beneath it with her teamless set, Jacques, Olivier, and a handful of new recruits. They gazed up at the stars, which blinked softly like 1,000 open envelopes. "You know," whispered Lisette, "I still get nervous. Before a long flight," Jacques said. "I still pack snacks like I'm going on a 3-day hike," Olivier murmured. "I still don't understand how that owl delivered mail with his feet." Plumet simply said, "I still believe in the scroll." They stood there, not speaking, letting the evening wind brush past their wings. And if you listened closely, high above the square, you might have heard a distant clapsoft, ghostly, full of pride. Perhaps Eugene, somewhere in the feathered beyond, was still applauding. Now let your mind soften, like wings settling after flight. Let the image blur the clock tower, quiet in the moonlight. Scrolls hanging in the breeze like gentle paper lanterns, and the pigeons curled in their nests. Dreams inked in lavender and parchment. You've followed them far tonight. You've flown with them between cities, through mishaps and laughter, under moonlight and marmalade skies. Now, take a long, slow breath. You've arrived. Let your eyes close gently, like the careful seal of a scroll. Let sleep carry your thoughts, just as the pigeons once carried messages from hearts unknown. And know that somewhere out there, in a quiet tower under stars, someone or some birdies keeping watch, just in case your dreams need delivery. Good night.